Hello everybody, my name is Bees, and today I'll be reading you a poem called The Wanderer in Old English. However, first, to familiarize yourself with the poem, I'm going to read it in modern English. Special thank you to Professor Liuzza at the University of Tennessee for allowing us to use his modern English translation of this poem. And, before we get started, this is a little bit of art from the 10th century, from a book called The Benedictional of St. Athelwold, which is a collection of illuminated manuscripts showing different scenes from the Bible or important scenes from Anglo-Saxon Christianity. On the far left is depicted the entry of Christ into Jerusalem. It's just before Palm Sunday when I'm recording this, and actually Palm Sunday is the day that Christians celebrate the triumphal entry of Christ into Jerusalem, as it happens. So if you're watching this video on Palm Sunday, happy Palm Sunday. In the middle is depicted Saint Adelthryth, who was an Anglo-Saxon saint. And on the far right is depicted the baptism of Christ. Now, this art is not from the book in which The Wanderer was compiled, but it is art from the 10th century, and the book in which The Wanderer was compiled was written in the 10th century. So to get a feel for 10th century art, I've given you this. Now, without further ado, here's The Wanderer in modern English, translated by R.M. Liuzza in the Broad View Anthology of British Literature. Always the one alone longs for mercy, the Maker's mildness. Though troubled in mind, across the ocean ways he has long been forced to stir with his hands the frost-cold sea, and walk in exile's paths. Weird is fully fixed. Thus spoke the wanderer, mindful of troubles, of cruel slaughters and dear kinsman's downfall. Often alone, in the first light of dawn, I have sung my lament. There is none living to whom I would dare to reveal clearly my heart's thoughts. I know it is true that it is a nobleman's lordly nature to closely bind his spirit's coffer, hold fast his treasure hoard, whatever he may think. The weary mind cannot withstand weird. The troubled heart can offer no help, and so those eager for fame often bind fast in their breast covers a sorrowing soul, just as I have had to take my own heart, often wretched, cut off from my own homeland, far from dear kinsmen, and bind it in fetters. Ever since long ago I hid my gold-giving friend in the darkness of earth, and went wretched, winter-sad over the ice-locked waves, sought, hall-sick, a treasure-giver wherever I might find, far or near, someone in a mead-hall who might know my people, or who would want to comfort me, friendless, accustom me to joy. He who has come to know how cruel a companion is sorrow for one with few dear friends will understand. The path of exile claims him, not patterned gold, O winter-bound spirit, not the wealth of earth. He remembers hall-holders and treasure-caking, how in his youth his gold-giving lord accustomed him to the feast. That joy has all faded. And so he who has long been forced to forego his lord's beloved words of counsel will understand. When sorrow and sleep both together often bind up in wretched exile, it seems in his mind that he clasps and kisses his lord of men, and on his knee lays hands and head, as he sometimes long ago in earlier days enjoyed the gift throne. But when the friendless man awakens again, and sees before him the fallow waves, sea-birds bathing, spreading their feathers, frost falling and snow mingled with hail, then the heart's wounds are that much heavier, longing for his loved one. Sorrow is renewed when the memory of kinsmen flies through the mind. He greets them with great joy, greedily surveys hall companions. They always swim away. The floating spirits bring too few familiar voices. Cares are renewed for one who must send, over and over, a weary heart across the binding waves. And so I cannot imagine for all this world why my spirit should not grow dark when I think through all this life of men, how suddenly they gave up the hall floor, mighty young retainers. Thus this middle earth droops and decays every single day. And so a man cannot become wise before he has weathered his share of winters in this world. A wise man must be patient, neither too hot-hearted nor too hasty with words, nor too weak in war nor too unwise in thoughts, neither fretting nor fawning nor greedy for wealth, never eager for boasting before he truly understands. A man must wait when he makes a boast, until the brave spirit understands truly where the thoughts of his heart will turn. The wise man must realize how ghastly it will be when all the wealth of this world stands waste, as now here and there throughout this middle earth, walls stand blasted by wind, beaten by frost, the buildings crumbling, the wine halls topple, their rulers lie deprived of all joys, the proud old troops all fell by the wall. War carried off some, sent them on the way. One, a bird carried off over the high seas. One, the grey wolf shared with death, and one, a sad-faced man covered in an earthen grave. The creator of men thus destroyed this walled city, until the old works of giants stood empty, without the sounds of their former citizens. He who deeply considers with wise thoughts this foundation and this dark life, old in spirit, often remembers so many ancient slaughters and says these words. Where has the horse gone? Where is the rider? Where is the giver of gold? Where are the seats of the feast? Where are the joys of the hall? Oh, the bright cup! Oh, the brave warrior! Oh, the glory of princes! How the time passed away, slipped into nightfall as if it had never been. There still stands in the path of the dear warriors a wall wondrously high with serpentine stains. A storm of spears took away the warriors, bloodthirsty weapons, weird the mighty, and storms batter these stone walls. Frost falling binds up the earth, the howl of winter when blackness comes. Night's shadow looms, sends down from the north harsh hailstones in hatred of men. All is toilsome in the earthly kingdom. The working of weird changes the world under heaven. Here wealth is fleeting, here friends are fleeting, here man is fleeting, here woman is fleeting. All the framework of this earth will stand empty. So said the wise one in his mind, sitting apart in meditation. He is good, who keeps his word, and the man who never too quickly shows the anger in his breast, unless he already knows the remedy a noble man can bravely bring about. It will be well for one who seeks mercy, consolation from the Father in heaven, where for us all stability stands. So, as I said, this poem was compiled in the 10th century, at the latter half of the 10th century, into a book called the Exeter Book, which is an astounding collection of Old English literature. It is, to my knowledge, the biggest collection of Old English literature in one place. So it has about 130 pages, it contains The Wanderer, but it also contains, on its own, I think the statistic that I saw was about like 1/6 of all literature that was written down by Anglo-Saxons in Old English. So the Exeter Book is a truly phenomenal book, and we are very lucky that we still have it. And this poem was in it. And it was probably written by a monk. Had to have been written by a monk, because monks were the only people that were literate, pretty much, in Anglo-Saxon society, especially to the degree that they could write down an entire poem. There was pretty much nobody in Anglo-Saxon society that could do that other than a monk. It isn't clear who composed it or who wrote down the oral composition, but only monks were sufficiently literate and trained to record poetry, so we don't exactly know who the person was that is being called the Wanderer, or in the poem, the person refers to themselves specifically as Artstapa, which literally means earth stepper. And so that's why the poem was actually posthumously titled in I think like the 17th or 18th century by some philologist, The Wanderer. They eventually came to call it that later down the line. But the poem in the book doesn't have a title, so we don't know what they would have called the poem. and we don't know, whose experience is being relayed to us. We just know that they call themselves Earthstepper. But it seems pretty clear that whoever this must have been, that is being quoted by the monk, right? Because if you go back through, you'll see that there's like a quotation, and then there's like an intro and an outro. So the intro and the outro are written by the monk, and that's also why they explicitly speak of like the mercy of the Lord, because this was a Christian monk writing down this poem, compiling it into the Exeter book. But they're quoting someone who must have been a thane. So a thane is a military retainer of an Anglo-Saxon lord, a companion of an Anglo-Saxon lord, a picked companion. So somebody who fights alongside their lord and receives splendor and gifts from their lord. And that person, that thane, might have lived at the latter half of the 9th century or the early half of the 10th. And the reason why they think, scholars think that this thane must have lived at the latter half of the 9th, early half of the 10th, is because of the dating of the poem. So, as I said, the Exeter book was compiled in the latter half of the 10th century, and so the poem must have been written sometime before that, but it also contains words in it. One of them you'll see when I read it in Old English is like the word hrimkalde. This means like ocean cold, ice cold. And that word is a loan into Old English from Old Norse. So it has to have been compiled sometime after, significantly after, the Danelaw started. The Great Heathen Army invades northern England, which we'll get to all of that when I start talking about the Great Heathen Army. But let's continue our discussion of who the monk is quoting. So as I said, a thane is a military companion of a lord, and it's really important to note that what's happening in the poem is that this person is lamenting that his lord was slain and his people were all also slain, because a lord is a protector of a certain amount of land in an Anglo-Saxon society. And so if your lord is slain, and you're a military companion of him, you have no choice but to go into exile, and your people now have no protection. So you now know, like, he laments that he's not getting, that he's not on the gift throne, right? This is an expression that they use to talk about being awarded gifts, being in the mead hall and being awarded gifts by your lord. And so, again, his lord is slain, he goes into exile, his life was once pretty good, now it's terrible, his people are, probably massacred, occupied by Danes, and so this person lived a truly just brutal life. So, as I said, the Great Heathen Army arrives in 865. The stories about it say, and it's not exactly clear whether or not this is, actually the case, but, because Ragnar Lothbrok might not actually have even been a person in real life, but the story goes that the king of Northumbria, whose name I'm forgetting right now, actually had Ragnar Lothbrok thrown into a pit of snakes, a pit of venomous snakes to kill him. And you're like, venomous snakes in England? They have venomous snakes in England, promise you. They're called adders. The Old English word is actually nadre, which, so like natter, but people were hearing a natter, and they thought they were hearing an adder, and eventually it got re-bracketed. But anyway, so the Great Heathen Army shows up. They're according to the stories about it, they are the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok showing up in the north of England to take revenge on the King of Northumbria for killing their father. They actually arrive in East Anglia because East Anglia wasn't opposed to the Vikings at that time, or at least wasn't opposed to the Great Heathen Army. well, at least where they arrived in East Anglia. And so they arrive in East Anglia, they ravage England for a very long period of time, but they're eventually thwarted by King Alfred. But for a while after this, England, as you can see over here on the right side of the screen, we have Wessex, which is ruled by King Alfred, and later his successors. And Wessex has control over the western part of Mercia, and Wessex even has good relations with Wales at this time. And then Wessex has from Cornwall to Kent under its control. But through a good portion of the end of the 9th, beginning of the 10th century, the entirety of the east of what's today England pretty much is under Danish control. So, yeah, so it was a really brutal time. You can imagine, Vikings just ravaging the north of England. And also, so there's a couple of important concepts in this poem that are expressed. And I think that it's really, really cool that Professor Liuzza decided that he wasn't going to translate the word weird in in Old English, weird. He wasn't going to translate it into fate or destiny, because that's what it means, but it has such a specific meaning and connotation to the Anglo-Saxons that you almost might as well just not translate it. You might as well just keep it as the same word and try to understand what that word meant to the Anglo-Saxons, because Anglo-Saxons viewed destiny as being a completely fixed thing. You had a day that you were gonna die. That was decided already, and so fate is inexorable, right? That was the idea. So that's what weird means, and that's why I suspect that's why Professor Liuzza decided not to translate that specific word, and decided just to keep it in Old English. And actually, it's also still a word in Scots, and it's still a word in English. This is where we get the word weird. Like you're a weirdo. I hear that a lot. But in Old English, it doesn't mean like something strange or out of the ordinary. It literally means fate, as in a completely deterministic understanding of fate. And there are other themes within this poem as well. There are some really, really deep themes explored within this poem. And I think that that's something that, if history is something that you're new to, that it's really good to note. And I think Dr. Jackson Crawford said this, and I hope I don't mess the quote up, but I heard him say this, and I know that he's building on a quote from an earlier author, but his quote kind of goes, if I remember it correctly, he says, the past is a different country, but it isn't full of different people. And I can pretty much guarantee you that if I had a time machine and I put you in good Anglo-Saxon clothing so that they won't freak out about it, and I sent you back to 10th century Anglo-Saxon England, you would find out that you had a lot more in common with these people than was different. And you would also find that these people would understand all of the same things that you do. And they would have been through experiences that a lot of modern people just absolutely would not be able to make it through. Like, I know that I've been through some tough stuff in my brief amount of time on this planet, but I don't think I'd be able to make it through being an Anglo-Saxon thane whose lord is slain and has to go into exile. I think that would be terrible. So I don't know if I would make it through, but the themes of this poem are, like, first of all, impermanence. So there's that beautiful stanza where he's talking about, and I hope that some audience members caught this, he's talking about old Roman ruins. And he comes up in his mind with an explanation as to how these Roman ruins eventually came to be abandoned. So there's, one an eagle carried off, one a gray wolf shared with death, one a sad-faced man covered in an earthen grave, right? He's describing his perspective, what he thinks happened with the collapse of Roman Britain, And then he says, until all the old works of giants stood empty. It is a really, I mean, the Anglo-Saxons, they knew that their world was temporary, that it was sort of a transition between, you know, the might of Rome, its collapse, and whatever was going to come next. And they were just, you know, in the transition. They understood that things changed every day in every way, you know, and they understood impermanence perhaps better than modern people. You know, sometimes modern people get caught up in the notion that history's over, but I guarantee you it's not. And then, of course, the other theme is fate, as we've already discussed. Weird is a central theme of this poem. That this was this person's fate, right? This was bound to happen to him. And then some themes are obviously sorrow, grief, and trauma. So there's a lot of lamenting on sorrow and grief, and even though they didn't have in Old English this word trauma, because that's a Greek word. I mean, they might have had it as a loan word, I could look it up, but they wouldn't have used it the same way. They wouldn't have used it to mean like mental or emotional trauma. They would have used it just to mean a wound, because that's what it meant in the original Greek. But we understand now as modern people with our advanced understanding of mental health that if you go through something like this, you are going to be affected by trauma. And that this person absolutely had, whoever this person was that's being quoted, whoever Earthstepper is, had an immense amount of trauma. I think that's worth thinking about. And then the last theme that is really important, that's really central to this poem as well, is lord-companion relationships. And this is a theme that if you read pretty much any Anglo-Saxon literature, I mean, there's a couple of examples I could think of that don't really have this as a theme, but so much Anglo-Saxon literature has lord-companion relationships as a theme, because that was how this entire system worked. A lord went and tussled with the other lords in their local region until the other lords in their local region said, okay, I give up, you win, I'm going to give you tribute. And that was subjugating the other lords, or they just defended themselves from other lords or other aggressors, and they defended themselves and their people. And so an Anglo-Saxon thane who's being given gifts on the gift seat by their lord, and who's having feasts with their lord where they're eating meat, which is something that a lot of people at that time didn't get to eat meat all the time, right? But if you were an Anglo-Saxon thane, the chances you got to eat meat pretty regularly were much higher because you were a companion of the lord of your little shire area. And so these lord companion relationships were super, super important to Anglo-Saxons. And modern people, I mean, I'm an American, I'm from the United States of America, and I can say that especially Americans look back on medieval history and we think of lords as like oppressors of their people. And I'm not here to debate whether or not, lordships are oppressive. I don't like the idea of, having to serve a lord. I think that I'd prefer to live under, this modern sort of like liberal economic system that, this sort of like liberal world system that we have going on right now. I think I'd prefer to live in this than a lord-companion relationship. But to these people who lived back then, they did not view themselves as being oppressed by their lords, as far as I can tell. I mean, I don't want to speak super broadly about, common people from this time because we don't have anything really written down from common people. It's hard to interrogate the perspectives of common people from Anglo-Saxon England. I mean, it's hard to interrogate the perspectives of people in Anglo-Saxon England at all because, it was a long time ago and our source material's somewhat sparse, although we do have a lot to go off of, but, it's obviously a very nuanced topic, but from poems like the Wanderer and also Beowulf and many other examples from Anglo-Saxon literature, it is clear that at least thanes revered and loved their lords. These people loved their lords. They would die for their lords. I mean, there's a poem called the Battle of Maldon, which I've already done a reading of on my page here, on my YouTube channel here, and a central theme of that poem as well is loyalty to one's lord. And there are many men in that poem. The poem is about a battle, of course, called the Battle of Maldon. There are many men in that poem who go to the death. They fight to the death with their lords because they would be so ashamed if they left the field of battle when their lord had been slain. They're like, I would rather die on this field of battle than go on living without my lord. So these people loved their lords. So I think that's something also that's really worth thinking about when we think about Anglo-Saxon literature and when we think about Anglo-Saxon culture in general. Okay, so finally, let's read the poem in Old English. If I've left anything out about the Wanderer that I should have discussed, then please, if anyone out there knows more about this than me, because I know that there are plenty of people that know more about this poem than I do, and know more about this period of history than I do, so continue the discussion down in the comments. If I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. But there's a little discussion about this poem and what it means and what's going on, and a little discussion about the sort of historical and cultural context out of which it emerged, to the best of my abilities to do so. But now I'm going to go ahead and read the poem in Old English, and because I've been studying how to speak Old English for a very long period of time in my life now, about 5 years. Coming up on about 5 years now that I've been learning how to read and pronounce Old English out loud to the best of the knowledge that we currently have about how Old English sounded in its time. So to provide an audio for that, here we go. Without further ado, this is the poem in Old English. Oft him anhaga are je biddeth, metudes milce, thach theche modkari jand laga lara, lange schelde chreron mit hondum hrim kalde sa, wadon rak lastas, weird with full ared. Swa quatherd stapa feda jamundi, wrath ra wel slauchte winemaga griere. Of dit schelde aan uchna je chwilke, minne kar quidon. Nis nu quicrenon, the ich himodse von minne dure, sweltule a setjon. Ich to so the wat, that bith in ourland richten thou, that ge his vertlok an faste binde. Chalde his hoort kovan, goedje swache wille. Ne my wery mold würde withstondon. Ne se chreie hi helpe je vremmon. Fordan domjörne dreirina oft, in hura breast kovan bindat faste. Swach modse von minne schulde oft arm kari ethle bedalet. Frömagum förfetterum salon, sildan jara goldwinne minne hruson, helstre burach an dit schanthon an wold winterkari over wadema je bind. Sochte selle dreuri sinkes bruton. Chwarich feur ode nach findan machte, thonethe in madu chale min minne wiese, ode mech freundlas na frevran wolde. Weman mid woonum. Wat se the kunath, hu slithan bith sorte je veran, tham the him lutchavath lelvra je chauena. Warath hine wrak last, nales wunden gald, verthlok a freyri, nalas faldan blad. Gemmon ge sellesekios, and syntheia, hu hine jaugude, his gold wine, wenedetu wiste. Woon al je draas. Fordan wat sethe shall his winedrichtes lelves, larquidum, longe fordolion, thone soran slap, somod at gadre, armne anhogan aftje bindath. Thinketh him an mode that he his mondrichten klippa and kysa and an knäletche, chand an chauvad, Swache hwyl mar in jardag yfstolas brak. Thonne anwakneth, eft win the last guma. Je zicht him before on faule wegas, badian brimfuglas, bradon fedra. Chreils an chrim an sna, halje je nemned. Thonne beuth thi cheviron cheurton benne sare after swasne. Sorbith je neuwad. Thonne magam je mint mold jand chwerveth. Greteth glústavum. Jorne jand sjaueth. Setja je zeldon. Swimmoth efton way. Flaut endrefert. No thar fella bringath kúdra gwydde juda. Caro byth je nuwad. Tham the sendan shall swydde je nache. Overwathema je bind wernin a zevon. Fordan ich je thengan. Ne mai jand thas world. For Juan mod seva. Minne je zwerge. Thonne ich aurla lif al jenthenke. Hu hi farlike fletton of javon. Mod je magutheinas. Swathes midden yard. Alra dogra je chwam, dreilseth ond faileth. Fordan ne mai werdan wiswer. Arche age wintra dal in world rike. Wita shall je dhuldi. Ne shall no to chat chert, ne to chrad wurde, ne to wak wiga, ne to wan hidi, ne to forch, ne to fagen, ne to felch givre, ne navre jilpes to jarn. Ge jare kunne, baurn shall je bidon, thonne ge balt sprieketh, odthet kollenverth, kunne jaurwe. Chwyder redra je chwyd chwerfan wille. An juton shall glau chale hu gastlik byth. Thon alre thise worlde wella weste. Stondath swa nu misenlike jant disne middan jard. Winde bewaune wala stondath chrimme bichererne. Chrudje tha edras. Warja tha winsalo waldend lichath. Drama bidra renne. Dugu thal je krank. Wlank bi wawle. Sume wui fornam ferede forthwege sumne fugel othbar. Over ganne holm sumne se chara wolf. Dalde je dalde. Sumne dreirichler. In earth skrave errol je gide. Ude swathisne ardjard alde ship and althat burgwara brachtma lalze ald enta je werk idlu stondon. Se thone thisne walstal wiese je thochte and thistaurke lif delpe. Jant thenketh froth in ferde, faur of diamon. While slauch de worn and thas wort aquith. Chwar quom mar, chwar quom mago, chwar quom madum juva, chwar quom sumla jesetto, chwar zindon selle dramas. Alla bort bune, alla burnwiga. Alle theldne stroom. Hu sel traje wat, je naponder nicht helm. Swa hel no ware, stondath nu an laste lovre dugude. While wundrum gach, wurm licum fach. Las fornoman aske through the. Wapen wal givru, woord sel mare. And gas stan chleldu. Stormas knusath, chrith resende chrusan bindeth, wintres woma thone won kumeth. Nipeth Nihshua, Nordan on sendeth, Chrech halvare, Chaledum on ondan, Alice arvoldlik, Ardan rike. Onwendeth wurde je shaft wereld, Under Galvenon. Gerbith Auchlane Gerbith, Fraundlane Gerbith, Monlane Gerbith, Mailane. Althis Ardan je stal edel werdeth. Swaquats notron mode, je zat him sundor at rune. Tilbith sethe his trouwe je galdeth, ne shall navre his torn taurikene. Baurn of his braustum akudan, nemthe ge artha botakune, erl mit elne je vremmon. Wel bitham the him arsekjeth, frovret hof hader on gavenom, thar us al selfasnung stondeth. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching. Again, my name is Bees. I've been learning how to speak Old English for about 5 years, but I've only seriously been studying Anglo-Saxon history for about a year now, if that. But the more that I learn about Anglo-Saxon history, the more enthralled by it I am. And I haven't been to school. I haven't formally been educated in this area. Eventually I will, but it's just not something that's possible in my life right now. I am just poor and I need to just be able to make money. So school is not really an option so much. But eventually I will go to study this stuff, but I just really care about it. I really care about Anglo-Saxon history, and I really care about Old English. And I think that there's good reason to read Anglo-Saxon literature in the original Old English. Firstly, because it's really hard to translate stuff in a way that makes sense to modern English speakers without losing the original meaning of the poem. Although I think that Professor Liuzza has done an incredible job, and again, another thank you to Professor Liuzza for allowing us to use his modern English translation of this poem for the purposes of this video. But also, I think that there are a lot of students that are learning Old English that can benefit from just hearing it read aloud. And lastly, I think that it's a way to connect to people from the past. Because, as I said earlier, and as I think is really, really worth stressing, there's that beautiful, beautiful quote from Dr. Jackson Crawford. I mean, maybe he didn't come up with it. Maybe he's quoting someone else. But the past is a different country, but it's not full of different people. That is absolutely true. People have always been, for the past 300,000 years that we've been anatomically modern human beings, we have been way more similar than we are different. And it's way too easy to look back at medieval history and say, how come they were living in huts with the thatch roofs? Were they dumb? But what's much harder is to learn about their actual history, to learn about what life was like for people in this time. And that's something that requires reading, something that requires research, and it's something that requires more advanced thought. And I think that in this world of, instant gratification and instant access to information on the internet, it's all too easy to forget that. So, anyway, thank you everybody for watching, and like and subscribe for more Old English and Anglo-Saxon history content. Liuzza I.